Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and this is the Backlog. This week I tackled Axiom Verge on the Nintendo Switch. In it, some dude named Trace wakes up in a weird place, and some robot-faced lady tells him to grab a gun, warning him that there's some sort of presence that will kill him if they find him. The whole setting and story deals with extra dimensions and other heavy sci-fi material. I was honestly worried that it was going to be a bit too complex for me to understand, but they managed to explain all the important bits clearly enough that I feel that I understood the plot for the most part. But where are my manners? This is a video game, so we should talk about gameplay. Axiom Verge is a Metroidvania. To review, these are platformers with an interconnected map that you're able to access more and more of as you collect upgrades and get more abilities for exploration. One lets you send out a drone to explore tight spaces. One lets you grapple and swing from the ceiling, and some let you phase through walls. While you could probably make comparisons to other powers from the genre, most of them feel unique to this game. Chief example of this might be the glitch waves you can fire out, which clear some paths, but also alter enemies to give them unique functions. Sometimes, this just equates to either making them easier to kill or just destroying them outright, but a lot of them cause them to interact with the environment in totally different ways. Figuring out when to glitch which enemies and how that causes them to behave is key to finding power-ups, new areas, and shortcuts, making for some very unique puzzle solving. And every one of these game-changing upgrades greatly affects how you can interact with and get around the world, as you'd expect for the genre. This allows you to not only progress further into the game, but also revisit past areas to access rooms you couldn't before. Luckily, not only can you mark the map to remind you to recheck certain places, but the whole thing is also laid out pretty clearly, so it's not too hard to tell where you still need to go back to get some stuff you missed. Of course, there are some points where your current objective or the way forward is vague and unintuitive, especially before you get some of the more useful and important powers, and you end up coming across a lot of dead ends. That said, given how many full maps and walkthroughs are available online, you do have options if you do get stuck. Just try to avoid falling into the same trap I did, checking a guide once when I got stuck for a while, then continually sliding back to it now and again, even when I didn't need to, due to a combination of temptation and curiosity. Beyond the big upgrades, there's a ton of other stuff to collect. There's the standard buff items, such as the ones giving you more max health or increasing the power of your projectiles. There's also a lot of text files that fill out the lore of the game a bit more, though some require a further item to read. Then there's the one that surprised me, the weapons. While there are only a few early on that are required for certain enemies or puzzles, most of these are completely optional. While there have been exceptions, this was not the way I expected things to go at all. I'm used to each weapon upgrade either improving or stacking with the current armament and at least being needed for forward progression. Here though, it's largely just another choice. A lot of times, whatever you get might be a bit better suited for fighting off whatever enemies are found in that area, but still, none of them ever became the end-all be-all gun of choice, and nothing ever became obsolete. Occasionally, I would go back to the default weapon. There were a few early game ones that I would also switch back to in certain situations. For the last level, I was still mostly using the lightning gun I had found over an hour earlier, and while the last thing I went out of my way to find was very well suited to taking out the final boss, had I been given access to it from the start of the game, it wouldn't have wrecked the balance. Just about every gun feels and plays uniquely, and given how even with each other they all feel, it shows a high level of creativity and game design. While this game does a lot of very cool stuff, I think this is my favorite part of it. Moving on to the difficulty, I'd say this game is neither easy nor hard. While I would describe it as challenging, there was no part where the game felt impossible. That's not to say there weren't one or two sections that felt like a pain, but overall, it kept a very good balance of requiring me to actually think and play seriously while not seeming unfairly frustrating. A very comfy level of difficulty. An interesting aspect that makes the game a bit easier is that each death is canon. When you fall, your essence floats back to the last save spot and you respawn. This can be used to your advantage, since if you make your way to an upgrade or collectible but die before you can get back to a save, you just get to keep whatever you found. I see a lot of potential for speedruns in this. I only needed to make use of this once, maybe twice, but it was quite nice that I didn't have to trek back through the same bit of level and gameplay, one right after another. One thing that makes the game a bit harder though is just how many functions you have. I was using a Pro controller and I believe I had to make use of literally every button on it, which is a lot to keep track of. Still though, it's mostly okay. Unlike in Dread where it felt like there was a bit too much stuffed into the controls, especially how they would sometimes want you to use several functions at the same time, here, as long as you keep your main abilities in the forefront of your mind, and take an extra moment to recall the rest as they become necessary, it's just manageable enough to avoid causing a headache. There's only two control issues that I really feel the need to call out, the first being the wall phasing power that requires a double tap. Most of the time, it works fine, but at others, you need to really hit it. A dedicated button would have been ideal, but given that all of them were already assigned and that double presses can be a bit finicky in general, I can't complain too much. The other issue is a small one that's mostly just weird. For some reason, B is confirm and A is cancel, which I thought we all agreed upon as a species is supposed to work the other way around. Like I said, it's a small thing, me mostly bringing it up more as a joke, but it did make starting the game a bit trickier than it would have been otherwise. Overall, they do a good job with the controls, getting the most out of them without quite crossing the line of making things too complex. As for the sound and visuals, it feels like they took notes from Metroid's vaguely horror and creepy vibes and said, nope, not enough, cranking that factor up a few notches. The game has original NES-style graphics with slightly more details. Some enemies you can tell what you're looking at, and others you get only a vague sense. A lot of the environments also seem somewhat organic, almost as if you're crawling around inside something living. I think they used the limited graphics to leave out just enough specifics and designs where you can get the general idea of what something is, while letting your brain fill in the gaps to make it even more creepy. The music can add to this, some tracks being nice, some being foreboding or despair-filled. One in particular was paired with an area where they threw in some slightly trickier enemies and gave me the impression of being thrown into some sort of hell or purgatory, and that death would be a relief. While I was still having fun with the gameplay and learning how to deal with the new area, every second that track was going, I was thinking to myself, I would like very much to leave, please. Combine good sound effects with these visuals and music, and you're left with something that isn't quite scary, but very unsettling and ominous, which I at least love. So in case it's not obvious, I have a very high opinion of Axiom Verge. It takes the foundation and inspiration from Metroidvanias, especially Metroid, and yet rather than just aping what's already been done, manages to create an experience that's uniquely its own. There's a sequel to it that I would be very open to playing sometime down the line, and I'd recommend this entry to anyone who is willing to play a Metroidvania. I also streamed 2 games this week. The first, in keeping with my really hard platformer kick, was Cuphead. This was my 4th or 5th trip through the game, and once again I improved, beating Island 1 in a half hour, clearing the second isle about an hour after that, and getting to Inkwell Hell in about 3 hours in. I took down King Dice in about 20 minutes and was set to clear the whole game in under 4 hours, a personal best, and then the Devil, whom I consider to be an upper mid-level boss, at least as far as the game is concerned. Took me an hour to clear. I really don't know what happened. Maybe it was karma for me talking smack on him. Maybe it was me psyching myself out since I was so close to a personal record. Maybe it was because I was streaming and hoping to keep it under a certain time, and so I self-sabotaged myself unconsciously. Either way, I did finally beat him, and then this happened. Come on, come on, come on, please, yes! He's defeated! I had 2 HP, so I even had a safety net. You motherfucker! I ended the stream at just under 4.5 hours. Between my flying through most of the game and still managing to get what I think is my best time, to that uncharacteristically rough last fight in Crash, I consider this both my best and worst run of Cuphead, and it kinda makes me wanna go right back to it, so that I can maybe have a more definitive playthrough. I also played through Mega Man X on the Switch collection. This is probably my favorite game of all time, either it or Majora's Mask, so I was really just doing this for my own satisfaction. Probably needed this after struggling with the devil so much the previous night. And yeah, it was a lovely time. I paid a lot of attention to the smaller details, and it heightened my appreciation for the title. It really is a near-perfect game, having fun gameplay, one of the greatest soundtracks of all time, and excellent character design. It's almost a shame since the X series has a lot of high-quality games, but none of them even come close to touching the first title in excellence. It's one of the easiest and strongest recommendations I can make when it comes to video games, you only wanting to avoid it if you're allergic to platformers. This playthrough for me was particularly notable for two reasons. The first was that I avoided the temptation to 100% it, since I didn't think watching me play through Armored Armadillo stage 3 times seemed like an interesting thing to watch. The second thing was that I almost completed a no-death run, me only dying once at the bottomless pit part with all the flying platforms in the first Sigma stage. I was so close it almost hurts more than a run where I had died multiple times. It does bring up something that confuses me about the game though. I have played through Mega Man X so many times that I know the game like the back of my hand, and it's actually become really easy. I think I used to die a decent bit back when I was a kid and just playing it for the first time, but now I honestly can't tell if the game is just one of the easier Mega Man titles, or if it is decently hard and I've just played it too much. If anyone has any insight, it would be appreciated. That aside, I cleared the game in under 100 minutes, so if you're interested in giving the game a look or just want my first-hand thoughts on it, it is definitely one of the more digestible streams that I've done. And that's one of the more positive episodes I've had of the backlog in a while, knocking a pretty solid title off my list and finding an excuse to talk about two of my favorite games again. I'm mulling over what I want to try clearing next week, and I'm thinking of streaming Metroid Dread over on the Victory Tricksters if anyone wants to visit me. But to take stock, the backlog is now down to 114. So with that said, thanks for watching, maybe subscribe if you enjoy this sort of thing, and perhaps I'll see you in the next episode.